When working in Pro Tools to create a new session, you can come up to the File menu and do New Session, or the quick key command, Command N. And you'll have a New Session dialog box that comes up. You have the option of choosing a blank session or creating a session from a template. Pro Tools has a wide variety of selections for templates, from those who use the 11-rack interface down to singers and songwriters who just have a standard interface and want to record some sessions but have inspiration to write without creating other tracks for accompaniment. Let me show you what I mean by just clicking OK on one of these sessions here and show you what Pro Tools has in store for a singer-songwriter. Okay, so when a session template comes up, you'll typically see a drum track that's already been pre-recorded and assigned. And you do have the option of going in and changing some of these virtual instruments and sounds. So there's a bass track, a piano track, rhythm guitar, vocals, and extra audio tracks completely set up with a click track and return tracks for reverb, delay, and other effects. So these are handy when you have inspiration ready to take charge, but you don't want the technicalities of setting up a session to get started. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this template and create a brand new session that's blank. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the session parameters. The parameters define what type of audio file that this is going to be. WAV is the default, and the other option is AIFF. If you're on a Windows machine, you also have the option for a Windows file as well. You can choose your bit depth, 16 to 32-bit float, and Pro Tools now supports interleaved files. So you can check interleaved here in the New Session dialog box. Your sample rates are dependent upon the interface that you're using, so you can use anywhere from 44.1 to 96 on a Pro Tools aggregate I/O system, but you have an interface you can record up to 192 kilohertz. Coming down to your I/O settings, it's always best idea if you're not working at home and you're working at someone else's facility to use stereo mix. That way they're appropriately labeled for the interface that you're using. And click OK. The next thing it's going to ask you is where you want to save your session. Never ever ever save your session on your system drive. It's not recommended, as you'll run into many errors, and your system drive is not only running your operating system, but it's also going to try to run your audio and your audio files at the same time. It's always beneficial to start off with an external drive that's either hooked up via USB or FireWire. So I'm going to save my session, call it New Session, and save it. And I've got a Pro Tools edit window that has come up onto my screen. I can toggle and get to the mix window and see that I have absolutely nothing set for my session. So the first thing that I probably want to do is create some tracks. To create tracks, there are two ways to do it. To do it via the menu system, you can go up to the track menu and select New. I highly recommend that you get used to this quick key function, Shift Command N, because that is going to give you your new track dialog box. This new track dialog box is multifunctional, so you can create different channels of tracks and types of tracks all at the same time. So if I wanted to create 5 stereo audio tracks and then go ahead and add additional types of tracks, I can do that. So let's go ahead and see the different types of tracks that we can have in Pro Tools. There are audio tracks, aux input tracks, master faders, on my system, VCA. There's also MIDI tracks, instrument tracks, and video tracks that you can add to your system. The time base selected is the default for that particular track. So since Pro Tools is always a sample-based audio recording program, it defaults to samples. So let's go ahead and click Create, and then we have our 6 tracks that show up in the edit window. if I expand and make them a little bit larger, and I'm doing that just by grabbing the divider line between one track and the next, or you can click on the amplitude section of each individual track and change the size, you can see that stereo tracks have that line in this middle of them, which separates the left from the right channels. The last track that I have is a mono track. So in the mono track, you're not going to see that line that divides the center of the track for the left and right counterparts. So let's go ahead and add some other track types to this session. I'll go ahead and add an aux input track, and we'll go in and add a MIDI track, and we'll add an instrument track, video, master fader. Okay, so now we can see all of the different track types that we have in our current session in Pro Tools. So our audio tracks allow you to import, record, edit audio signals as waveforms. They can be mono, stereo, or any multi-channel format as long as it is supported by your interface. Your MIDI tracks, let me bring one up to the top here. MIDI track defaults to be in purple. Those store MIDI note and controller data information. The instrument tracks, right below the MIDI tracks, default in this brownish yellow color, and they combine the functions of a MIDI track and an aux input track. So you're able to actually create one track to monitor it and trigger the MIDI information. Your video tracks let you add, import video to the timeline, and of course, standard Pro Tools software lets you only add one video track at a time per session. Your aux inputs you can use as an effects return, destination for a submix, for example, of your drums, or to monitor or process live audio that's coming in from a synthesizer that doesn't happen to be tied into an instrument track. Your VCA master faders are other tracks that you can have in Pro Tools HD or software with a complete production toolkit. They emulate the operation of VCAs on analog consoles, and those are covered more in an advanced course. Your master fader, you should create one in every session that you're working with, particularly with audio, and it's a single fader that's used to control the output of the output or a bus level. So it controls the overall level of the audio tracks altogether that's coming out of the output of the session. Whenever you're coming into Pro Tools and working with audio tracks, it's always best to name them the first thing after you create them. To name a track, you can double click on the track nameplate and you'll have a dialog box that comes up. So if you wanted to call this one drums, you could say next and go down to the next track, or the quick key function for that is command down arrow. Okay, so command down arrow will take you down through your tracks, or command up arrow will take you up through your tracks. So if I wanted to come in here and name this one synth, and then name this one piano, you can go in and name these tracks. It's important to name your tracks first when you create them, because once you start recording audio onto these tracks, the names of the clips are connotated to the track name. So if I started recording on the drums track, synthesized drums or something from a keyboard synthesizer that emulates drums, the clips will be called drums-01. If you don't, then you're going to end up with a bunch of tracks named Audio 1, Audio 2, Audio 3, Audio 4, and as you get further and further into your session, it will be very confusing to discriminate which one is drums, which one is bass, etc. So naming your tracks is very, very important to do first when you start with your session. It's always best to create more tracks than not enough. However, if you're in a situation where you need to delete tracks out of your session, it's really not a problem to do so. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. You could select the track nameplate that you want to delete, come up to the track menu, and choose delete. Or you can select the tracks that you want to delete, and I'm going to click and hold shift in order to make the selection to multiple tracks. Then right-click on the last track and choose Delete. So now those tracks are deleted from the session.